Hi everybody, my name is Andy. I'm a very grateful, recovered, but definitely not cured alcoholic. It's good to be here with you again. I love these Wednesday sessions as we continue to look through the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, a book where I found the clear, concise instructions for how I could recover from an incurable illness. We are in more about alcoholism. And last week we read a lot about step 1. This is the remaining part of this chapter. We're bottom of page 37. We've just last week read the story of Jim. Now we're going to go on and hear a story of another chap that they call Fred. And we're also going to get a nice illustration of what the insanity is like. So our behaviour is as absurd and incomprehensible with respect to the first drink as that of an individual with a passion for, say, jaywalking. And just on the off chance that you live in a country and where jaywalking isn't a crime, it's not actually here in the UK. We come under some Vienna Road Act or something. But in America and other countries, it's an offence to cross the road in a place where it would be dangerous to do so, or if there's a crossing over there and you cross there. And I remember when I lived in Charlotte, in North Carolina, we had jaywalking laws there. Jaywalking, but diving out in traffic, weaving in and out, crossing the road in a dangerous way. And this is talking about someone that's got a passion for that, which is obviously a slightly ludicrous example, but we'll see that it's not in comparison to our alcoholism. He gets a thrill out of skipping in front of fast-moving vehicles. He enjoys himself for a few years, in spite of friendly warnings. Up to this point, you would label him as a foolish chap, having queer ideas of fun. Luck then deserts him, and he is slightly injured several times in succession. You would expect him, if he were normal, to cut it out. Presently, he is hit again, and this time has a fractured skull. Within a week after leaving the hospital, a fast-moving trolley car breaks his arm. He tells you he has decided to stop jaywalking for good, but in a few weeks, he breaks both legs. On through the years, this conduct continues, accompanied by his continual promises to be careful or to keep off the streets altogether. Finally, he can no longer work. His wife gets a divorce and he is held up to ridicule. He tries every known means to get the jaywalking idea out of his head. He shuts himself up in an asylum, hoping to mend his ways. A brilliant illustration there of those that repeatedly try rehab, because they go in, they get over the physical craving, but they don't do anything about the mental obsession, right? But the day he comes out, he races in front of a fire engine which breaks his back. Such a man would be crazy, wouldn't he? Absolutely he would, wouldn't he? You may think our illustration is too ridiculous. But is it? We who have been through the ringer have to admit if we substituted alcoholism for jaywalking, the illustration would fit us exactly. However intelligent we may have been in other respects, where alcohol has been involved, we have been strangely insane. It's strong language, but isn't it true? And yeah, it is strong language. You know, when they wrote this book, especially, you know, today we soften language, don't we? And we often use the word insane, like, I had an insane time, it was great. But back then, they really were, and they only used it for one thing, the term insanity, which really was that mental condition. And no one likes to be told they're insane or think they are, do they? But it's true, in respect to drinking we are. Some of you are thinking, yes, what you tell us is true, but it doesn't fully apply. We admit we have some of these symptoms, but we have not gone to the extremes you fellows did, nor are we likely to. For we understand ourselves so well after what you have told us that such things cannot happen again. We have not lost everything in life through drinking, and we certainly do not intend to. Thanks for the information. That may be true of certain non-alcoholic people, so problem drinkers that aren't alcoholics. Though drinking foolishly and heavily at the present time are able to stop or moderate because their brains and bodies have not been damaged as ours were. They haven't crossed that invisible line that us alcoholics have. But the actual or potential alcoholic, so the real alcoholic, with hardly an exception, will be absolutely unable to stop drinking on the basis of self-knowledge. This is a point which we wish to emphasize and re-emphasize, to smash home upon our alcoholic readers, as it has been revealed to us out of bitter experience. And, this is, you can remember all the other examples we've read so far. We've seen Bill's story, and we saw that he couldn't do it with self-knowledge. We've seen these other examples. They're going to give us another one. Let us take another illustration. Fred is a partner in a well-known accounting firm. Now, they use the name Fred here. They changed his name. This is a real story. This is a story of Harry Brick. And Harry Brick's story can be found in the book Experience, Strength and Hope. Although, to be honest, I wouldn't bother going and read it. You can read it, but the write-up here is way better than Harry Brick wasn't a good writer. Let's just put it that way. But his original story got taken out of the first edition. It's in Experience, Strength and Hope. So here they changed his name up, but this is a true story. His income is good, he has a fine home, he is happily married and the father of promising children of college age. He has so attractive a personality that he makes friends with everyone. If ever there was a successful businessman, it's Fred. To all appearances, he is a stable, well-balanced individual. Yet he is an alcoholic. We first saw Fred about a year ago in hospital, where he had gone to recover from a bad case of the jitters. It was his first experience of this kind, and he was much ashamed of it. Far from admitting he was an alcoholic, so no step one in here yet, right? He told himself he came to the hospital to rest his nerves. The doctor intimated strongly that he might be worse than he realised. For a few days he was depressed about his condition. He made up his mind to quit drinking altogether. So he's doing this, on self-will though. It never occurred to him that perhaps he could not do so, in spite of his character and standing. Fred would not believe himself an alcoholic, so definitely no step one, right? Much less accept a spiritual remedy for his problems. So because he doesn't accept step one, that he is an alcoholic and unable to control his drinking and that his life's becoming unmanageable, he's put him in a position where he's preventing himself from doing step two. He can't accept a spiritual remedy for his problem because he hasn't accepted he's got a problem. This is why the steps are in order, right? We told him what we knew about alcoholism. He was interested and conceded that he had some of the symptoms, but he was a long way from admitting he could do nothing about it himself. He was positive that his humiliating experience, plus the knowledge he had acquired, would keep him sober the rest of his life. Self-knowledge would fix it. So he doesn't feel hopeless yet. He doesn't feel helpless yet. And so he still thinks, there's a way of doing this. I can do this, whatever. Just like I did when I got here. I could see I finally saw I had the symptoms. I didn't want to admit I was an alkie. And I certainly didn't want to take a spiritual thing because I was an atheist. I didn't want to know anything about that. So I was very much like this chap, Fred. We heard no more of Fred for a while. One day we were told he was back in the hospital. This time he was quite shaky. He soon indicated he was anxious to see us. The story he told us is most instructive, for here was a chap absolutely convinced he had to stop drinking, who had no excuse for drinking, who exhibited splendid judgment and determination in all his other concerns, yet was flat on his back nevertheless. Again, just like my story, I was running a business. I thought somewhat successfully. It was, I was getting by. And in all other areas of my life, I thought I had stuff sussed. But this alcohol thing would still put me flat out on my back every time. Let him tell you about it. I was much impressed with what you fellows said about alcoholism, and I frankly did not believe it would be possible for me to drink again. I rather appreciated your ideas about the subtle insanity which precedes the first drink, but I was confident it could not happen to me after what I had learned. Again, self-knowledge doesn't work for us alcoholics, all right? Doesn't matter how much self-knowledge you've got, doesn't matter how much willpower you've got, it ain't gonna work. I reasoned I was not so far advanced as most of you fellows, something we all think when we get here, right? Or many of us do. that I had been usually successful in licking my other personal problems, and that I would therefore be successful where other men had failed. I felt I had every right to be self-confident, that it would only be a matter of exercising my willpower and keeping on guard. In this frame of mind, I went about my business, and for a time, all was well. We've all been there as well. I think many of us have been. I know I went through dry spells, and I went through times when, even when I was drinking, things seemed to be okay. I had no trouble refusing drinks. I began to wonder if I'd not been making too hard work of a simple matter. And this is again when we start letting that thinking come into our head, and remember back to page 31 when we had all those methods we had tried, all those softer, easier, gentler, experimental ways that we thought would be able to stop us from drinking, and yet none of them worked. One day I went to Washington to present some accounting evidence to a government bureau. I had been out of town before during this particular dry spell. Note the word dry spell there. Okay, so a period of not drinking, but he's not got a program of recovery, so he is just dry. He's staying off the booze by self-will at this point. There was nothing new about that. Physically, I felt fine. Neither did I have any pressing problems or worries. My business came off well. I was pleased and knew my partners would be too. It was the end of a perfect day, not a cloud on the horizon. And how many times have you heard in people's shares in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous that so often it's when things are going so nice and smooth and brilliantly, that's when we drink. Because we're not under pressure, we haven't got the problems, we're not being forced to, come and try and do things about it, and we think, everything's going nice, and we let up. Exactly what happens here, right? So, as I say, we often hear people come in and they say, it's great, I've got my wife back and the DWI was dropped against me and life's getting really, really good, not a cloud on the horizon. And then look what happens to him. I went to my hotel and leisurely dressed for dinner. As I crossed the threshold of the dining room, the thought came to me that it would be nice to have a couple of cocktails with dinner. That was all, nothing more. I ordered a cocktail, and my meal. Then I ordered another cocktail. Why? Because he triggered the phenomenon of craving. He'd taken that first drink, so of course he ordered a second one. After dinner, I decided to take a walk. Now he's gone for a walk. He's triggered that phenomenon of craving, so when I returned to the hotel, it struck me a highball would be fine before going to bed. So I stepped into the bar and had one. And we all know it ain't going to be one. I remember having several more that night and plenty next morning. I have a shadowy recollection of being in an airplane bound for New York and of finding a friendly taxi cab driver at the landing field instead of my wife. The driver escorted me about for several days. Quite a bender, this one, isn't it? I know little of where I went or what I said and did. So blackout territory that many of us have experienced. Then came the hospital with unbearable mental and physical suffering. As soon as I regained my ability to think, I went carefully over that evening in Washington. And this next paragraph, or bit of a paragraph, is in italics. Anything in the book that's in italics, I think it's really important. Not only had I been off guard, I had made no fight whatever against the first drink. This time I had not thought of the consequences at all. I had commenced to drink as carelessly as though the cocktails were ginger ale. And I'm sure many of us have been through that experience as well, that no fight against that first drink. I remember when the doctors put me on medications for my stroke and my blood pressure and said, you can't drink on these. Didn't matter what doctor said, I had no mental defence. I couldn't help myself, I drank anyway. I now remembered what my alcoholic friends had told me. How they prophesied that if I had an alcoholic mind, the time and place would come, I would drink again. They had said that enough. They had said that, though I did raise a defence, it would one day give way before some trivial reason for having a drink. Well, just that did happen, and more. For what I had learned of alcoholism did not occur to me at all. There you go, all the self-knowledge in the world. When we get under that mental obsession to pick up a drink, all that self-knowledge is going to do us no use whatsoever. I knew from that moment I had an alcoholic mind, so he's now starting to admit powerlessness. This is the beginning of step 1. I saw that willpower and self-knowledge would not help in those strange mental blank spots. I had never been able to understand people who said that a problem had them hopelessly defeated. I knew then it was a crushing blow. So here now we have our friend Fred getting the gift of desperation. This point at which we realise we can't do it with self-will, we can't do it with self-knowledge, we can't do it with all of these things, and we're going to have to take help. It's when the gift of desperation comes, and it's actually a beautiful thing. It's not pleasant to go through at the time quite often, but it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. 2 of the members of Alcoholics Anonymous came to see me. They grinned, which I didn't like so much, and then asked me if I thought myself an alcoholic and if I were really licked this time. I had to concede to both propositions. So this is him doing step 1 in effect, isn't it, right? They piled on me heaps of evidence to the effect that an alcoholic mentality such as I had exhibited in Washington was a hopeless condition. They cited cases out of their own experience by the dozen. And I've got that line highlighted too. This is so important when we're 12-stepping someone, we're taking someone through these steps. You notice this guy's already getting to step 1. He's conceding, and they still continue to pile on examples from their own experience. How do we get dozens of examples from our... Well, not only can we draw on our own experience, but I get, when I talk to others, to draw on your experiences that I've heard in the rooms. I don't have to name you. I don't break any anonymity. But I can be sat with a sponsee who's got it, and I can say, well, I know someone in the group I go to that had this problem. They had that situation. They did it, and it worked for them. So I can draw on these dozens of other cases that I've experienced in the rooms. This is why it's so important we share our experience, strength, and hope with one another, right? Listen to what that does. This process snuffed out the last flicker of conviction that I could do the job myself. And that's what it takes, isn't it? Admitting we are completely powerless, that we can't do this, and that we need help. This is step 1, going into step 2. Then they outlined the spiritual answer, step 3, and program of action, steps 4 through 12, which 100 of them had followed successfully. Though I had been only a nominal churchman, their proposals were not intellectually hard to swallow. But the program of action, though entirely sensible, was pretty drastic. It meant I would have to throw several lifelong conceptions out of the window. That was not easy. And yet, that's the bit that's not easy. This is a bit when we start to take action. This is why we think that we lose so many people on step 4. Why? Because step 4 is the first step. We've actually got to stop thinking and talking and do something. We actually have to take out a pen and write stuff down. Up until now, in the steps, there's no writing necessary in the first 3 steps. I know that some workbooks do writing and whatever else, but there's no writing in the first 3 steps as far as I'm concerned. In step 4, we actually have to start doing something and writing down. That's why we're losing people, because they have to take action and no one wants to take the action. But if we've hammered home hard enough that they have no choice, they're going to do it, right? And that's really our role as a sponsor, to try and lead them to this point. The beauty of this is this. But the moment I made up my mind to go through with the process, I had the curious feeling that my alcoholic condition was relieved, as in fact it proved to be. He hasn't even done anything yet, right? He's made this decision. The moment he made up his mind to go through with the process, before even taking the actions, he's already feeling that his alcoholic condition has been relieved. And that is often the case for many of us when we get to step 3, isn't it? And we turn the care of our will and our life over to the care of a higher power. We often feel quite relieved, and we think, wow, and we know that the problem is on the way to being solved, as long as we take the rest of the action. We've got to take that action. Quite as important was the discovery that spiritual principles would solve all my problems. Not just the drink problem. It would solve all my problems. And you go, well, hang on a minute then. I ain't got any money in the bank. Is it going to save that problem? Well, the money's not going to magically appear in your bank. But you know what? You're going to be clear-headed. You're going to be seeking intuitive guidance from a power greater than you, and you're going to know what to do to take the actions to put the money in your bank. You know, it's the fear of those things. It doesn't mean the loan will be paid, but it means the fear of it and what to do about it will be dealt with. It's how perception changes. I have since been brought into a way of living infinitely more satisfying and I hope more useful than the life I lived before. My old manner of life was by no means a bad one, but I would not exchange its best moments for the worst I have now. Yeah, I completely agree with that, honestly. I would not go back to it even if I could. Fred's story speaks for itself. We hope it strikes home to thousands like him, and he felt he had felt only the first nip of the ringer. So in other words, Fred's case here, he's a high bottom drunk. The cases we've read up until now, these people, you know, are often low bottom situations. This successful businessman, in every sense, everything was going smoothly. He still had the business, he still had things like that, but he couldn't control his drinking. So he's a fit high bottom drunk. And this is the great news. You know, when they started this program, they thought only the really desperate low bottom cases were going to get this. But they soon found out this will work for anyone that concedes that they are really an alcoholic and is prepared to do the work. Most alcoholics have to be pretty badly mangled before they really commence to solve their problems. So in other words, you know, we have to have a bottom. But believe me, that bottom is a choice. It's the choice when you decide to stop digging. Don't compare your bottom to other people is something that I think is very important. You know, you'll listen to Experience Strength Hope, you'll hear all sorts of stories. You'll hear people say how terrible it was. And you think, I didn't go that far. Doesn't matter. Doesn't necessarily mean you're not an alcoholic. Think of Jim, think of Fred, think of the stories that we've had here, these high bottom drunks. But when they decide that enough's enough, when they decide that that is it and they're done and they start taking the action, that's when the problems start to go. Many doctors and psychiatrists agree with our conclusions. One of these men, staff member of a world-renowned hospital, recently made this statement to some of us. What you say about the general hopelessness of the average alcoholic's plight is, in my opinion, correct. As to two of you men whose stories I have heard, there is no doubt in my mind that you were 100% hopeless, apart from divine help. Remember, this is a man of medicine saying this, and this is another man of medicine. His name was Percy Poliak, and I believe he worked at Towns Hospital. Had you offered yourselves as patients at this hospital, I would not have taken you if I had been able to avoid it. So, you know, when these people came in, hopeless cases that these doctors at the time wouldn't have taken in because they didn't think the medical thing could help them. Get them off the detox, maybe, get them past that bit, the physical craving, but it wasn't going to help solve the problem. Goes on to say why. People like you are too heartbreaking. Though not a religious person, I have profound respect for the spiritual approach in such cases as yours. For most cases, there is virtually no other solution. Once more, the alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defence against the first drink, except in a few rare cases. Neither he nor any other human being can provide such a defence. His defence must come from a higher power. And that was where I thought I was going to run into trouble. And if you think that's where you run into trouble too, don't worry. Next week, we're going to crack into the chapter We Agnostics, where we're actually going to start to look at that. And if you're an atheist, that chapter is for you as well. Don't worry about it. So we'll be going through that. But just before we wrap up today, this is the point at which, when I'm going through this book with people, we've talked about step one, we've covered it. Most people I'm going through this at this point have pretty much taken step one. They've taken it as we're reading through this. But when we get to the end of this chapter, this is when, as a sponsor, you can go back and you can do the double check, make absolutely sure they've got it. And the two bits I always do, I turn back to page 33. And I remind them, if we are planning to stop drinking, there must be no reservation, nor any lurking notion that someday we will be immune to alcohol, right? If we're going to admit that we're an alcoholic, that means it in every sense of the word we've been reading about here. We cannot control our own drinking. We will never be able to do it by self-will. Self-knowledge isn't going to do it either. We're an alcoholic, we're beyond human aid, and we have to do this. That's what we're saying when we say we're an alcoholic. So we can go back to the question. It's not a question, but we can turn it into one that was at the back on page 30. This line that says, the delusion we're like other people presently or maybe has to be smashed and that we had to concede. So we can turn it into a question. Do you fully concede that you are an alcoholic? And if they say yes at this point, with everything you've been through and everything that means, there's no taking it back. Once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. No take backs at this point, right? Once a pickle, can't go back to being a cucumber. So you admit you're an alcoholic. Once you're at that point and you concede you've got to do it this way, you're ready. That is step one. You have admitted you're powerless, that you can't do it by yourself, and that you need help from outside, and that help's going to come, and we're going to be talking about that next week as we get into step 2, as we look at we agnostics. I'm going to leave it there. Look forward to hearing your share backs. Thank you so much for having me and allowing me to be of service.